This is Decoding Learning Differences with Kimberly Lavelle, and this episode is Self-Directed Learning with Gretchen Wegner. This is our second conversation that we had, and it was so much fun. There's just so much to it, and there's so much that I get so passionate about, and I felt like I was learning so much and reflecting on so much. My kids definitely benefited from me having this conversation with Gretchen, and I know that your kids, whether they are your personal kids or your students or however you know them, they will also benefit from you listening to this conversation. Enjoy. Hello, welcome back. We are so happy to have you again. For those who are listening and didn't meet our guest Gretchen Wegner last time, go back and listen to that episode. You're kind of okay to listen to it after this one probably, but it might make more sense to go in order. So make sure you listen to that one as well. But just for those who don't know, or as a reminder, will you tell everyone a little bit about who you are and yeah.
Well, and since we're going to be talking about self-directed learning in this episode, I will sort of change my introduction to have that be the theme because it's been an obsession of mine ever since before I was a classroom teacher. But then I became a classroom teacher and I didn't last for very long. I have to say, I lasted for 3 years. And one of the reasons I didn't last is because I was a highly creative, like if I had had more mentoring, actually, I think I would have been an award-winning teacher, or something, some really, like I was so good in so many ways, but it frustrated me to no end that I was making decisions for students about what they should be curious about, what they needed to learn, and what constituted good and important learning. And I think students really enjoyed my class when I was a teacher, but I also think I was a little chaotic because I was constantly trying to pull out their own curiosity, but also maintain the standards that I needed to maintain. And and I hated grading. They would be like, I don't want to do homework. And I was like, I hear you. I don't want you to have to do homework and I don't want to grade. So it was kind of a mess. And I'm so glad that I actually lost it was a private school and they didn't recontract me. And I accidentally happened into something called academic coaching. I didn't know what it was at the time. It turned out that it was exactly what I needed because I got to spend an hour every week, kind of like a tutor, but helping students reflect about their own learning and helping them when they weren't motivated, figuring out how they could get themselves motivated. And sometimes that's not self-directed, but so often it was at the very least I could have the message for them that you can't control how good or bad your teacher is. And I'm using bad in quotes right now. But you can control how you react to your classroom environments and to your studying when you're at home. And you can create a learning lens with your own eyes when you're in class. And then you actually can construct your own learning experiences when you're at home for however you want to learn. And you can make it anti-boring for yourself. And I call my work now the Anti-Boring Learning Lab. And I've actually left academic coaching because so many educators wanted to be trained by me in the methodology that I've created for how to help students be anti-boring. But really, that's the definition of anti-boring for me is self-directed learning, like ecstatic self-directed learning versus boring doing what other people tell me to do. So, did I introduce myself? That was kind of long, but I think
That
I
was
got there.
that was fabulous. Yes. Yeah, I mean you hit the major points that
Mhm,
also explained a lot about self-directed learning in the process,
mhm.
which is yes, the theme of our conversation today. And you kind of already defined it.
Well, I was going to ask you though, how would you define it? So I would be really curious to hear you say that if you're willing.
Yeah. That is, yeah, I think my definition would be another way that I hear it is in this homeschool community, a lot of times I'll hear child-led learning,
Mm-hmm.
um, which also a lot of times people will say unschooling, but then
Hmm.
unschooling has a lot of other stuff with it. And I feel like it doesn't give the picture of what's actually happening, whereas child-led
Mhm.
learning or self-directed learning is a little more, you get a picture of there's learning happening.
Mhm.
So I prefer those terms.
Mhm.
And I guess I would define it as a lot of what it sounds like. The child, the student, the person is deciding what they want to learn about and and kind of driving that
Mhm.
education. They're the driving force and their own internal motivation and natural desire to learn that I think we all have until it is bored out of us
Mhm.
or rewarded out of us. Um,
Right. Right.
then yeah,
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful landscape to paint about what we're playing with inside self-directed learning. And I'll just add a nuance for myself because so many, when I was seeing student clients, and now I train educators, many of whom are academic and executive function coaches who work with students. And so many students aren't privileged the way many homeschool students are. And so have to follow the teacher's curriculum, have to follow what others are defining for them. And I am even curious how you can be self-directed in how you receive a teacher's teachings, even if there's so much you don't have control about. You do have control of your own attention and how you process it. And so I am interested in helping empower students in the range of learning environments they're in, whether they're in one where they can be completely self-led or whether they are in others where they have to be more creative and intentional about how they see and receive the instruction.
I love that. That the ability to empower a kid no matter what their learning environment
Yeah.
is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And we complain about students being passive learners, and yet we set up so many passive learning environments. And so we actually need to teach them the skills for how not to be passive in spite of a situation that's set up for them to be passive.
Right. Right. Okay, so my brain's going a couple of places. Well, the one thought I had, even when I was talking about the self-directed, is like the one issue I've always had with it is, which is solved, I guess, in a way, but not beautifully, in a classroom setting, is like, I guess when I see like the unschooling method, like people who go really extreme with it, they're not suggesting anything to the kids.
Hmm.
So then I'm like, well, how do you know if the kid is interested in, like right now, my kids are super interested in learning about Egypt, but how would they know they were interested in that if they had never been exposed to it?
Right.
So yeah, that's my one that I always have that as like it can only be so child-led. Like there has to be some exposure to the world that allows them to get interested in something that they've never heard of before. Which I don't
Yeah.
think takes away their own agency.
Right. Can I share
Yeah.
with you a similar but different conundrum that happens in my world of coaching? Because you'll see why I'm sharing this in a moment. But many people who decide they want to become academic or executive function or life coaches for students go through training that goes through something called the ICF, International Coaching Federation. And if you go through an ICF pro or supported program, you are taught very specifically that you may only draw the wisdom out of your client, or in this case, we'll say your student, and you believe that they are, I forget their phrase, but something to do about they are whole and good exactly as they are. They don't need me to teach them anything. I can just draw from them with empowering questions and et cetera, good coaching practices. And so I think you see the connection, right? I'm sort of
Yeah.
comparing that to the unschooling process.
Yeah.
And a lot of adults or coaches come to the anti-boring learning lab after having been life coach trained. And actually, just even today, someone was telling me a story. I hear stories every week. And she said, I went through this ICF based coaching certification. I noticed it was so good for me. She said, the way it was good for me is I was a teacher. And so I learned how to listen better because I wasn't a good listener as a teacher, which is true. Many teachers are not great listeners because we're here to speak more than listen. And then she said, but after I got better at listening, I started noticing that I was holding myself back because I could see where the kid was struggling and I just wanted to help them with that, but I didn't feel like I was allowed to. And then I found your world, Gretchen, and I teach a process that I call the consent burger. I mentioned it briefly in our last episode. And it's a process of sandwiching the thing that you want to share in between a top bun and a bottom bun. And the top bun is, or let's just use your example of Egypt. Like, hey, we need to pick something that we're gonna learn about upcoming. I would love to share with you about a country that kind of inspires me. Um, could I do that for about 10 minutes? Could we just talk a little bit about what Egypt is like and what I think is cool about ancient Egypt, just as an example? Could I share that with you for a little bit? And then you could decide if you also find it interesting. So there's the top bun, right? You get to be a whole person yourself. You don't have to be a blank slate. You can be someone with an agenda and an interest. And then you ask the kid, would you like to hear about it? It's only going to take a little bit of time. And then assuming they say yes, if they say no, that's a different conversation. But if they say yes, then you share about it. You honor the time frame. You don't talk on and on as parents and teachers can tend to do. And then there's the bottom bun. Like a burger is messy if you just have your bottom thumbs on the meat, right? You need a nice bottom bun to hold it. And that bottom bun is saying, "Oh, well, I thought that was super interesting, but guess what, honey? You have your own brain and you get to decide what's curious for you. So what do you think?"
Yeah.
And then you let them be the expert again in that moment. And that way you got to collaborate together. You both got to
Yeah.
be experts. And I have found that both parents in their parenting and educators in their teaching, when they embrace the consent burger, voila, they suddenly have much more motivated exchanges with students who are willing to be self-directed and also who you trust to be self-directed in the area that you think is going to support them best.
Yeah. I love that so much. I think it treats everyone with so much respect in asking for that consent and getting excited and sharing that excitement and then asking them what they think. And at the end they can say, I don't really care about Egypt, but like it they know that that's going to be heard and valid and like that's
Mhm,
okay. So like I love everything about that. And I was
mhm,
thinking about I have I have been annoyed. I've been like a like guinea pig kind of person for people who are learning life coaching, and so I've been like their guinea pig a couple of times, and I always hated it because all they did was ask me questions, and I'm like, this is not helping me. Like I didn't feel at the end of it like, oh wow, that really helped me see whatever. Like give me it. Like if I want the advice. So like
mhm,
I actually personally would much prefer a coach with that kind of a style of
mhm,
truly deeply listening and giving me resources that I don't already know about because there are resources that we don't already know about. And it also makes me think about like the like psychoanalytic style of therapy, which from my understanding, and I'm not the expert in it, but I've listened to a lot about it and read a lot about it also. It's kind of proven to be less effective for most people than when tools are given,
mhm.
when the therapist is actually giving some tools on how to
Right,
overcome things.
right.
So, yeah, I think
Yeah.
people don't know what they don't know and they can't find out through questioning alone, although Socrates might, get mad at me for saying that. Or at least it's a much longer road. Because then I also think about this, you keep getting me thinking about things. The like in math, they there's a big push for, and I'm blanking on it right now, but basically, inquiry-based learning and exploring things and learning, the kids learning something and the teacher never teaching them directly.
Hmm. Right.
And it feels like, and what they've shown is that it really is wasting the kids' time because, like, you could
Yes.
just show them how to do it. You can
Right.
give them some inquiry, get them interested and curious, and
Right.
then show them how to do it five
Right.
minutes later so
Right.
that we can save time because,
Yeah.
it's taken thousands of years to get to where we're at in
Yeah.
math. Like,
And this is where this conversation is connecting up with the previous one about neuromyths. We could also call them edumyths because sometimes it's
mm,
not just about neuroscience in the brain, but it is about education.
yes.
And there is a power to explicit instruction and to knowing, and a lot of the research is showing that when you are a novice, when you are new at something, you need explicit instruction. And explicit instruction, if it's given in a very specific way, is actually the most effective and efficient. And then once you gain some more knowledge and capacity, and you're not just a novice anymore, that is when you're ready for more inquiry-based spaces. So I think what you're saying is really powerful. And I think also, like, I think a questioning process could be really good, like
Yeah.
that never ending question after question after question, if you're consenting into it. It's like, I really would like for a period of time for you to ask me a bunch of questions because I'm a little unclear about what I know or how I see it. So could we start there? And like, how much more engaged would you be in those sessions if
Yeah.
you had said, yeah, this is what I'm ready for, or this is what I want, or I'm ready for it, but I don't want it to be for a whole hour. Like,
Yeah.
I can do some sleuthing inside myself for a good 20 to 30 minutes, and then I'm going to want us to get practical, or I'm going to start feeling itchy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for us to have more spaces in our learning collaborations with people, and I consider coaching to be a learning collaboration. I don't know what else it is besides that, and I want to collaborate with other people around it. And for me, that also means I'm such a bossy learner now. It's like, so I want to co-create with everyone I work with. Even if I'm paying you, I want to co-create our experience, and that will help me be able to surrender into your expertise if I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
And there are ways to co-create with kiddos too.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
do you want to share about that?
Yeah, so there's one more piece that's really important to me, and especially in an environment where that I know many of your listeners are in, where you have some homeschool families, and then also specifically homeschoolers who have some learning differences, because that does layer in what can be experienced as a challenge, especially for parent homeschooler teachers who don't have learning differences yourselves. Well, even if you do, that layers in a different kind of challenge. But so I find students get actually really inspired when they learn the science behind how they work alongside strategies to put that science into action more effectively. And I know that doesn't sound exciting the way I just said it, but it's like, how often are we given an owner's manual to our brain? And I think that's why learning styles took off, to reference our previous conversation, because oh, that gives me an owner's manual to something inside me that acknowledges my strengths. And so in this context of self-directed learning, my favorite thing, and one of the first things I do with students, is I teach them a mini lecture that I've created based on the science of learning that I call the study cycle. I like to use the word study because I find it to be a more student focused word than learning. You could call it the learning cycle too. And I'm aware, I can even imagine right now some homeschoolers might be like, well, we don't give tests, so our kids don't need to study, so that's not a relevant word. But I love the word because I feel like people own it. Like I study, and you can study anything. When you read an article, when you read a book, you're studying. Studying just isn't, for me, it's not just about tests. It's about me choosing to learn something that I want to learn, which is different. It's a different word when teachers teach you something. So I call it the study cycle, and I tell students it's there's so much cool research about how the science learn about how the brain learns. And a lot of it is really complicated, but there are three things I've seen that if we learn to do these three things when we're learning anything, we're going to be awesome learners for the rest of our lives. And would you like to learn those three things? I asked the student, and then you might recognize the top of the bun.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And then yeah, doesn't that sound enticing? And then, I mean, I have a very particular way that I teach this that I know so many people have so little time, especially if you're a coach in a session or if you're a teacher in a classroom. So it takes under 10 minutes to teach. And just by the way, if you want to see this modeled, it is available in my free Unlock Student Learning course that's available on my website. And we'll put the link below for that. But I'll just give you an overview right now. But just know that you can go get the whole thing modeled for yourself for free. Um, but the three steps are we got to get stuff into our brain first. That's step number one, right? It's first exposure to the information. The second step is that we have to test ourselves to see what we know and what we don't know. Because we don't know in that first encoding, we don't know if we got it or not. So, like when you listen to now I'm referencing our previous conversation, but if you listen to a podcast
Yeah.
and you're not usually an auditory learner, that's your encoding for the first time. And then when you go to talk about it with somebody, or if you go to your book club to talk about it or whatever, then you're testing yourself to see what you know and what you remembered and what you don't. And usually there's a moment when you're like, oh, darn it, I'm not saying it correctly, right? Or this one part I know I got, but there's this other part that I don't have. And then that sets you up for step three, which is going back to learn it again, but in a new way, to encode in a new way, and preferably not the way you took it in the first place. A lot of students, when they're studying for tests specifically, will go back and like reread, whatever, like redo. And that is so boring for the brain. The brain is just going to tune out. Um, but if we learn how to encode in interesting ways, and then if we learn even more brain science so that we're encoding in ways that are proven to be really useful to the brain, then we've really learned how to unlock our own learning. And it's a cycle. So we do that over and over again. So we encode in a new way. And then I'm going to ask you now, what do we do after we encode in a new way?
We test ourselves.
We test ourselves. You looked at your notes. I saw you, but that's okay. I forgive you. Uh, if you wanted to do true testing of yourself, you would have tried to remember without
I
looking
guess
at
that's true.
but that's okay.
I reference for security.
Yes, which so many of us do. It's a really important point that you just made. We reference for security because we want to look smart. You're the host of the podcast. You didn't want to get it wrong with your guest and in front of all your listeners. But so often students do that too. And if we can learn to tolerate making a mistake in public, that's better for our brain. So I'm actually going to put you on the spot again and see if you can not look at your notes. And it's totally fine if you mess it up. But do you remember what the three steps of the study cycle are?
The first step is to get new information, first exposure,
Mhm.
and we test ourselves, and then we learn again in a new way.
Yeah, you got it. And I'm guessing because this time you looked up and away, and I could tell your gears were working a little bit. And I'm guessing also because I called you out, it heightened the learning experience a little bit. But I'm guessing you're always going to remember that now, or at least you're more likely because the stakes were a little higher because I did call you out a bit. And I'm doing it lovingly, right? I'm not doing it because I'm trying to call you out, but I'm wanting to model that we ask our students to do really vulnerable things when we ourselves are often not willing to be vulnerable in our own mistake making. And it's very important to me to have educators working with students who don't mind catching ourselves when we're in ego and trying to look good for others
Yeah.
and practice chipping away at that a little bit because students themselves are so vulnerable when they're learning and we forget
Yeah.
that. We
Yeah.
forget that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that is beautiful. Um, one of the things, another reason that I'm going to remember that is because I was immediately applying it to my
Ah,
own kids, like in my head, and I'm like,
yeah.
because one of our issues is math, is like, my one kid's, oh, I hate math, math is boring. It was like, but you don't hate math. Like you're talking to me about math concepts all the time. It's just like the pencil part of writing down an answer that's like, that's boring.
Hmm.
Um, so I was thinking about this as like, just teaching my kids this whole step and that, and I don't know, like you can tell me, but what I'm seeing it as is like, they're learning the information on how to do the math. And then there's the practice pages, which I'm seeing as like the test ourselves step. It's like they've learned it, and then they're testing themselves. And as needed, learning it again in a new way, because if they're not understanding it, then I'm stepping in and exposing them to it in a different way, probably with like manipulatives or something.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that is an accurate um, use of each of those steps. And I'm going to layer this a little bit because we're talking about this in the context of self-directed learning.
right,
And what you just described to me was a wonderful lesson, not very self-directed.
right,
And so the next question that I think is juicy to chew on in situations like that is how do we let the student using the consent burger to take a little bit more ownership? And if you have those of you who've listened to the two podcasts side by side will have heard me talk about the study senses in the last one and the study cycle right now. And those are actually two puzzle pieces that fit together beautifully. If you ever do anyone decide to take the courses in the anti-boring learning lab to see how they all fit together, you'll see it's a beautiful match. And then if especially if you teach your kids both the study cycle and study senses, so it's not just in your brain, they know it too,
right, right.
then your kid can be like, you know what, I do think I need to test myself by just doing a bunch of problems today.
Yeah,
Or it could be like, oh, but wait, could I test myself in a different way using a different sense? Is that possible, Mom? What
yeah,
idea do you have? I could do, well, let's think about the study cycle. Does that match the study cycle? Are you looking at your notes while you're, or, whatever?
yeah,
It's like then you can have a rich metacognitive discussion about their own learning. Or
yeah,
you could say, at some point, I need you to just do the practice sheet because that helps. But let's figure out how you also can partner here.
yeah. Well, and
So,
that's honestly that's why that came to mind is because that piece, that math piece of like,
mhm,
we homeschool, but we're with a public school charter. So like we still
yes,
have to meet the standards and have to show that
yes,
growth.
yes,
So, and I have to show work samples and all of that stuff.
yes.
So I feel like, reading is extremely self-directed. Like they both are
They're
love
happy
to
to do it.
read
Yeah.
or
That
addicted
math,
to it.
not so much.
And they love learning about science. And they love learning about
Yeah.
history and
Yeah.
like all of it. They love. So that all feels self-directed and we go deeper when they want to
Hmm.
and we go quickly through things that they're not as interested in.
Hmm.
But they love learning all of that. But the math, and even
Yeah.
then, they love the math,
Yeah. They just don't like it
but
so
don't like
boring.
proving that they know the math.
Right. Right.
So
And
that's why my brain went there is like, how do I make math
yeah.
more self-directed for my kids?
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
I've become a very selfish podcast host
Yeah.
right now, making it all about.
Right. Well, and it's so I think part of it is naming like, hey, you guys, I just did this cool podcast with this lady. Remember how you had to be quiet while
Yes.
like so I learned some things that might help us figure out how to make math a little less boring. I mean, we still are going to have to do the boring stuff, but I wonder like what if we learned a little brain science about how the brain learns, especially
Yeah.
hard things? And what if we tried to apply that brain science together and like, are you up for that? And I know your kiddos are young. How old are they that we're talking about right now?
5 and 7.
Yeah, so that's really young. But
Yeah.
I've also seen the study cycle, especially the way I draw it out, can work for young students.
Yeah.
And even just to just to say, this is what the brain needs.
Yeah.
Where are we now?
Yeah.
Can at least give them some explanation and understanding for why it really would be good to test ourselves through some repetition and problem solving.
Yeah.
I'll be curious now. I need to know. Ah.
I will have to let you know how this conversation goes because, yeah, it'll
Yes.
definitely be happening probably in the next hour.
Well, and specifically, if you have time, and you could even watch it with your 7-year-old, maybe, but get on my website. You sign up
Yeah.
for that free. Get in the visitor center, do the unlock learning one,
Yeah.
and there's lots of videos in there. But I think it's easy to find the one where I'm modeling just the study cycle. If it's not, let me know. But
Yeah.
try that, and
I will do
then
that.
yeah, and then one of the purposes of the free visitor center is to teach you how to teach it to students. So anyway, I'd be so curious if you tried.
Yes. No, I definitely will be trying. So, yeah, I look forward to that probably later today because we've already done it all for today.
Yeah,
So then it'll be like, it's not about in this moment. It's about, hey, I've
yeah,
noticed. This
yeah,
is
yeah.
why. What do you think?
I love it.
That I'm excited for that. Um, okay. What else do we need to know about self-directed learning? I feel like there's still a lot, but
There's so much, but I feel like those two pieces, the consent burger and the study cycle, are, for me, it's the center of my anti-boring methodology, those two pieces. There are more pieces of brain science. I find it really helpful for students to understand as they get older. Now you have me so curious about the age of your kids because so the idea of working memory is something in the anti-boring learning lab right now. We're all learning more about working memory. I don't know if you even know what that is compared to other types of memory, but I just get so inspired by even teaching things like that to students because when I mean, this may not be true for your kids, but let's just say when math is hard, it might be because we're expecting too much in our working memory and we go into cognitive overload. And I think even younger kids can understand the idea of cognitive overload. And here are some strategies that help keep us from being in cognitive overload. And God, what if every student understood that? What if every student could raise their hand and say, I'm in a little cognitive overload right now. I need blah, blah, blah. to
yeah.
help. So I feel very increasingly passionate about not just becoming better educators for students by understanding these things ourselves, but by teaching it to students so we're not the only one with the information. And then once they know it, collaborating with them to help design meaningful learning experiences.
This has been a lot more helpful personally than I thought it was going. I mean, not that I didn't think it would be helpful. I thought it'd be interesting and a great conversation for everyone. But this feels like a therapy session or a coaching session where I'm like, yes, this is what I can do with my child. So when you're talking about that, I'm thinking, okay, no, that is it. I do think that's a piece of it, right? Because one of the things that my kids struggle with is the fine motor of writing letters and numbers correctly. Like they have these brilliant minds, but then they have to like slow down to how do I make it? Which way does it go?
Mm-hmm.
And in
Cognitive
fact,
overload right
the
there.
one the other day before starting math was like, I'm gonna write out all my numbers so I know which way they go. And like wrote out all the numbers.
What a beautiful thing to
And now that's the
do.
bookmark is all the, 0 through 9 written out so that they can reference it. And I'm like, I love that. And when I offer to write down the math answers, everything happens so much faster and more smoothly because I've taken away part of that cognitive overload.
Yep. Yep. And so where I like to layer in the science is I love that you're aware of that. And instead of being an educator who makes a choice for students to take it away so it goes faster and lowers their cognitive overload, to teach them about working memory. And I think even a 7-year-old could understand about it and say, when you made that choice to write your numbers down, you were so smart. because there's this thing called working memory where we hold the information that while we're thinking about it, and it only has a few limited spaces in it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're trying to remember how to write a letter, you don't have enough space in your working memory to actually solve the problem.
Yeah.
And you were so smart. Now, there are times when Mom, I just write the letters for you so you don't have to. And that goes, what's that like for you? And you could hear what that's like for them and say, so what do you think? When is it good for you to practice freeing up your working memory yourself? And when is it good for me to help you free up your working memory so you can use your precious brain space on the thinking? What do you think? What an incredible learning experience for your kiddos. My eyes are wet as I think about elementary school students being able to think that through it. Mom, I'm really upset because I got in a fight earlier and I just can't think. Could you just write the numbers down for me today? Because I don't even have the energy to write them down myself. That would be a perfectly beautiful request.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could say, like, I've noticed that I've been writing them for you for a while, which is fine if you need that again. But I'm wondering, do you have enough energy right now to practice your own working memory strategy?
Yeah. Well, and I'm also always trying to like what I'm also thinking about is like then reducing the cognitive load in the future by, okay, we're separating out those skills of
Yes.
writing down the number. Like I've written it down, but now you're going to write it down below where I wrote it so that
Yes.
while you're writing it, you're only copying. You're not trying to retain it and think about the problem. Like it's just
Yeah.
so we're separating out those skills,
Yeah.
which is always a big thing that I suggest to families who are trying to figure out how to help their kids is like with anything
Right.
written, we're always, writing is such a huge
Oh,
multifaceted.
writing uses so much working
Don't,
memory.
yes.
It
So
really
I'm always trying
stresses
to
it
like
out.
break it apart, but yeah, and I try to do it some, but I don't think I've not spent this much time like
Hmm.
thinking through all of these pieces. So
Right.
a very
And
wonderful conversation for
yeah,
me.
well, and so there's just one more quick thing I want to layer in, and I'm a little
Yeah.
conscious of sounding like a broken record, but I think it's helpful for people to hear how my brain thinks through these things. So I love how you've noticed all of the things your kiddos are doing. And certainly we can, I love everything that you've said that you're going to do. And I would be so curious how conscious they are of how many they're doing. Like, I would love to be a fly on the wall if you were to say, how you just hate it when we have to write down all the math? I suddenly realized that it might be that there are too many things that are happening in that moment when you're writing down the math. Can we just make a list or draw a picture of all the things? Like here you are, you've got the number, you have to remember the way the number faces. Like that's one thing you're thinking about. What else are you thinking about? And then make a list of all the things.
Yeah.
And that way it's not just you, the educator, making the choice for
Right.
them. Although that might be a fine, maybe your kid doesn't have the capacity right now to think that through. And so that's fine for you to do it. But if they have the capacity to not even take that reflection away from them, but to help them, because you might get so surprised by they might name two more things that you weren't even thinking
Yeah.
that they're doing in that moment.
Yeah. Oh yeah, now I'm thinking the funny things they'll say about like, well, I was also thinking about what to eat or
Well,
like
I was just about to say that. We
yeah,
do math before lunch and it's
yeah,
like, yeah, okay, good.
yeah,
That's one thing. Because maybe
yeah,
then before we do math, we'll plan what lunch is going to be so that you don't have to think about that, or whatever. But I just
yeah,
think it would be so interesting
yeah,
to hear what they would say. And to me, that's true. I don't know if self-directed is even the right word for it, because actually, as I hear myself talking to you, what I seem to really believe in is collaborative learning spaces where there's true collaboration between adult and child at a developmentally appropriate level and not giving too much power to any one side, but
yeah,
true collaboration.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think I love that, and I think it makes sense to call it self-directed learning when there's been too much power within the teacher.
Yes.
And then,
Yeah.
especially if you're coaching a middle school kid, a teenager who feels
Mhm.
that they don't have any power, they don't have any choice, and like empowering them that no, it is self-directed, like giving them that power. And if you're also talking to the teachers about it, like getting them to
Yeah.
kind of back off a little about what they're
Yep.
trying to do.
Right.
But then, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I love that. The overall goal being collaborative learning spaces. Like
Hmm.
that is beautifully said. So much exciting things. I love this. And like you said, co-creating the experience
Hmm.
with the consent burger and the study cycle
Hmm.
and brain science. So much.
Well, and I'm appreciating this conversation too because um I mean I'm aware my tools that I've created are really helpful for classroom teachers and for those who are in coaching capacities with students. But I hadn't thought for a while about how useful they truly are for homeschool groups and homeschool parents. And I mean, in some ways, it's self-serving to say, "Okay, people, go take my course, my set of tools." But I really do teach about it's growing. But right now, I think the number is like 7 different, like clear, drawable on a whiteboard explanations for brain science that kids understand
Yeah.
that you can use to support whatever you're teaching. And so it's exciting to me to think about having more chats with homeschool parents.
Yeah. Well,
Hmm.
and I was also just thinking, like, yes, the other great set of people that I want, all of the homeschool parents, if like me, they're in like a public school charter situation where there is like a learning coach, a teacher
Yes.
situation
For
over
them to
them,
know these things. Hmm.
then yeah, we need to send all of them to your courses to learn all of these things
Hmm.
because they are often in a situation where they are one-on-one or I mean the parents usually there in some capacity, but like at different
Yeah.
ages, they can be coaching
Yeah.
a lot more than a classroom teacher typically
Yeah.
is. So
I
they would
do
be a
find
great,
you're right. It's like educators in quirky corners of education is the way I put it. But I live in California and we
yeah,
have a very active public school section of public schools for independent learners that are often work one-on-one or in small group with educators. And that sounds very similar
yeah, I'm
to
in
that
California.
homeschool. Oh, you are.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
same thing
yeah,
here. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, all of our California public school charters that have the homeschool situation. Obviously, there
Right.
are public school charters that are not that way,
Right.
but
Right.
there's public school charters that are specifically for homeschool families, and those the teachers employed there would greatly benefit from what you're saying because that this kind of stuff is so much more empowering and helpful for them than like a classroom management. Like they don't need
Right.
that. They
Right.
need everything you're offering. So yes, we need all of them to listen and then sign up for your course. Love it.
Well,
Thank
now
you.
that we've saved the world.
Yes. Or at least a little bit of it. Solved a couple problems for and the whole world in some ways for our students. So I love that.
Yes. Yes.
Um, Thank you so much for being
Oh,
on.
my
I
pleasure.
hope everyone else got as much out of it, or even a fraction out of it as much as I did. So
Hmm.
thank you so much.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And I just want to say, in case people aren't at a place where they can click, that my website is antiboringlearninglab.com. So you can go there if you're moved to catch any of those free resources.
Yes, antiboringlearninglab.com, and
Mhm.
it will be down below. And yes, so click again if you need listen, click, find it. It's just worth it. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you.
Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.